If you're watching this, you've probably dealt with some neighborhood busybody, or maybe even a full-blown nightmare HOA. But have you ever had one form its own private police force, complete with flashing lights and delusions of authority, try to raid your private property? Because I have, right here on my ranch, miles away from their precious beige cul-de-sacs. They rolled up expecting to intimidate some quiet rancher. What they found was the annual Steel Dragons MC charity barbecue in full swing. And let me tell you, their little power trip deflated faster than a cheap pool toy. It all started innocently enough, or maybe deceptively is the better word. About 5 years ago, I finally achieved my dream, buying a decent chunk of acreage, 60 acres of rolling hills, a bit rocky, partially wooded, with a good spring-fed pond, and an old but solid farmhouse. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, buffer zone included. My nearest neighbor was over half a mile away. For the first couple of years, it was bliss. Just me, my horses, a few rescue dogs, and the wide-open Texas sky. I fixed up the farmhouse, repaired fences, cleared some brush, typical ranch life. I worked remotely in cybersecurity, so my days were spent coding with the window open, listening to the wind, and my evenings were for chores and enjoying the peace. I kept to myself, mostly, friendly waves to folks I saw on the county road, but basically living the quiet life I'd always wanted. Then, the bulldozers arrived. Not on my property, thank God, but on the several hundred acres bordering the east side of my land. A developer had bought it up, aiming to build one of those master-planned communities, Harmony Creek Estates, or some other equally bland, aspirational name. Initially, I wasn't too worried. It was far enough away, separated by a thick stand of trees and a small creek that formed part of my property line. I figured, okay, maybe a bit more traffic on the county road eventually, but live and let live. What I didn't realize was that Harmony Creek Estates came with an HOA forged in the fires of petty tyranny, helmed by a man named Bob Jenkins, a retired mid-level manager who clearly missed wielding even the tiniest bit of authority. And somehow, Bob got it into his head that his domain extended beyond the meticulously manicured lawns and identical mailboxes of Harmony Creek. He seemed to think it included my rustic, very much not part of the HOA ranch. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a glossy flyer tucked into my mailbox, which is at the end of my long driveway, right by the county road where their development started. It wasn't junk mail. It was a welcome neighbor packet from the Harmony Creek OA, complete with their lengthy rulebook. Things like approved paint colors, beige, taupe, or greige, lawn height regulations, max 3 inches, prohibition of visible trash cans, except on pickup day, and rules about overnight parking. I chuckled, tossed it in the recycling. Clearly a mistake, meant for one of the new houses going up. They couldn't possibly think this applied to my working ranch land. Oh, how wrong I was. About a month later, I got the first official-looking letter. Certified mail, no less. It was from the HOA, signed by Bob Jenkins, president. It cited a violation, unapproved livestock visible from designated community areas. I had to read it twice. My horses? In their pasture? Visible from where? Their nearest house was almost a mile from my pasture, through trees, maybe if you climbed their water tower with binoculars. The letter demanded I erect a privacy screen, compliant with HOA aesthetic standards, or relocate the animals. It included helpful diagrams of approved fencing, white vinyl picket naturally, and warned of daily fines for non-compliance. This wasn't funny anymore. This was absurd. I drove down my driveway and looked back towards Harmony Creek. You could barely see the roofs of the nearest houses over the tree line. There was no way my horses grazing peacefully were an eyesore. This Bob Jenkins character was either blind or deliberately looking for trouble. I decided my first response should be polite but firm. I drafted a letter explaining that my property was not, nor had it ever been, part of Harmony Creek Estates, that it predated their development by decades, and that their HOA covenants had absolutely no jurisdiction. Here, I included a copy of my deed's property description, and kindly suggested they consult their own plat maps. I sent it, certified mail, figuring that would be the end of it. That, my friends, was just the opening skirmish. Bob Jenkins, it turned out, wasn't just a power-tripping retiree. He was a power-tripping retiree with way too much time on his hands and a festering resentment that his kingdom ended at the edge of the freshly laid sod. He was about to become the bane of my existence, and he had no idea the kind of hornet's nest he was poking. His little fantasy world was about to collide head-on with reality, and it wasn't going to be pretty for him. The peace I'd worked so hard to build was under siege, and I was quickly realizing that reason and politely worded letters weren't going to be enough, not by a long shot. This called for a different approach, one that Bob, in his beige little bubble, couldn't possibly anticipate. He wanted to play games. He'd soon learn I could play too, just on a whole different field. Bob Jenkins did not reply to my letter directly. Instead, about 2 weeks later, I received another certified letter. This one wasn't a violation notice. It was thicker. Inside, I found a stack of documents. The first page was a sternly worded letter from the HOA's legal counsel, some local firm probably happy to take the HOA's retainer fee. It essentially restated the HOA's position that activities on my property affected the aesthetic value and enjoyment of Harmony Creek Estates, and therefore, they claimed a right to enforce certain standards under nuisance doctrines, and bizarrely referencing some obscure county ordinance about unscreened agricultural operations near residential zones. The rest of the packet contained grainy, long-distance photos of my property, pictures of my horses in the pasture, a shot of my admittedly slightly rusty but perfectly functional stock trailer parked near the barn, even a picture of my vegetable garden, which apparently constituted an unattractive farming operation. It was invasive and creepy. They had clearly trespassed or used a serious telephoto lens from somewhere on their side. The letter demanded immediate compliance with the previous notice regarding the livestock screen, plus remediation of the unsightly trailer, parked hundreds of yards from their property line, mind you, and the unapproved agricultural plot. The fines were escalating daily, according to their internal, completely unenforceable schedule. I felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. This wasn't just petty anymore, it was harassment. They were inventing violations, misinterpreting laws, and actively surveilling me. Who did these people think they were? My cybersecurity brain started kicking in. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. It was an entity attempting to exert control and extract money based on fabricated claims. It required investigation and a strategic response. First, I called the County Planning and Zoning Department. I explained the situation and asked about the unscreened agricultural operations ordinance they cited. The county official I spoke to chuckled. "Yeah, that ordinance exists," she said, "but it applies to things like commercial feedlots or large-scale industrial farming operations directly adjacent to residential neighborhoods, mainly concerning odor and waste runoff. A few horses and a vegetable garden on 60 acres, miles from their actual houses? Absolutely not. That's standard rural land use. Tell Mr. Jenkins to pound sand." She also confirmed my property was definitively not zoned as part of Harmony Creek and had no legal ties to their HOA. So, their entire premise was bogus. Check 1. Next, I needed to know more about Bob Jenkins and his HOA operation. A little online digging revealed Bob was indeed a former middle manager, something in regional insurance sales. He seemed to thrive on bureaucracy and meetings. The Harmony Creek HOA website was full of pictures of him beaming at community events, cutting ribbons, shaking hands. He created committees for everything: architectural review, landscape compliance, social activities, and, chillingly, a community safety committee. This last one seemed particularly active, posting tips about reporting suspicious activity, which seemed to include anything non-beige, and emphasizing adherence to rules. It hinted at patrols, but I couldn't find specifics. I decided a more direct approach was needed for information. I had a few casual acquaintances in the nearest town, people I'd bump into at the feed store or the post office. One of them, Dale, worked construction and had actually helped build some of the infrastructure in Harmony Creek. I met him for coffee. "Oh yeah, Bob Jenkins," Dale sighed, rolling his eyes. "Thinks he's the mayor of Stepford. The guy's wound tighter than a banjo string. Constantly complaining during the build phase, the construction trucks were too dusty. The workers started too early. The porta potties weren't aesthetically pleasing. Total pain." Dale confirmed the HOA was Bob's personal fiefdom. He'd stacked the board with like-minded cronies, and they ruled with an iron fist. "But get this," Dale leaned in conspiratorially. "He's been talking about upgrading their safety committee. Says the county sheriff is too slow, too far away. He wants his own patrol cars, uniforms, the whole 9 yards. Thinks they need to project authority." Alarm bells went off. Uniforms? Patrol cars? Was this guy actually planning on creating a private police force? That seemed incredibly illegal, but Dale shrugged. Wouldn't put it past him. He convinced the board to raise the HOA dues last quarter for enhanced security measures. People grumbled, but Bob's persuasive when he's talking about protecting property values. This was getting serious. My next call was to my cousin Mark. Mark is a lawyer, specifically one who enjoys sticking it to bullies and overreaching organizations. I laid out the whole situation: the letters, the surveillance, the bogus ordinance, the escalating harassment, and Dale's intel about the enhanced security. Mark listened patiently, punctuated by occasional incredulous snorts. "Okay," Mark said when I finished. "First off, their legal claim based on that county ordinance is laughable. We can shut that down easily. The harassment and surveillance are definite torts, invasion of privacy, possibly intentional infliction of emotional distress, depending on how far they push it. But this enhanced security thing, that's potentially juicy. If they're impersonating law enforcement or attempting unauthorized enforcement actions, especially off their own property, they're stepping into a world of legal hurt. Like criminal charges hurt." He advised me to meticulously document everything: every letter, every interaction, time-stamped photos of any further surveillance attempts. He also suggested installing security cameras on my property, facing outward towards the access points and the direction of Harmony Creek. "Make sure they're visible," he advised. Sometimes just knowing they're being recorded is enough to deter idiots, but with this Bob guy, maybe not. I took his advice immediately, setting up several high-definition cameras covering my driveway entrance, the pasture fence line closest to their development, and the area around my house and barn. The next piece of mail from the HOA wasn't a letter, it was an invoice. A bill for several $1,000s in accumulated fines for the horses, the trailer, and the garden, plus a new fine: improperly maintained fencing along community border, referencing the old barbed wire fence on my side of the creek, a fence that had been there for probably 50 years and was perfectly adequate for keeping my livestock in. It included grainy photos of a couple of sagging wires. The due date was in 10 days, with threats of liens on my property and further legal action. Attached was a glossy brochure. Title: Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol, Keeping Our Neighborhood Secure. It featured photos of 2 men dressed in security guard uniforms, navy blue pants, light blue shirts with sewn-on patches reading HCCSP, and build hats. One photo showed them standing beside a white Ford Explorer, with official-looking decals and an amber light bar on the roof. The men were grinning, looking self-important. One of them was Bob Jenkins himself. The other I didn't recognize, but he looked equally puffed up. My blood ran cold, then hot. They'd actually done it. They'd created their own fake cops, and now they were sending me invoices like some legitimate authority. This had gone way too far. Mark was right. These guys were heading straight for a cliff, and I needed to be ready when they went over. But just documenting and defending wasn't enough. Bob Jenkins and his rent-a-cops needed a lesson. A real lesson. And just then, scrolling through my phone contacts, I paused on a name: Chaos. Chaos, or Chuck as his mother called him, was an old army buddy. now president of the local chapter of the Steel Dragons Motorcycle Club. We didn't see each other often, but we'd kept in touch. The Steel Dragons weren't your stereotypical outlaw bikers. They were mostly vets, tradesmen, small business owners who loved riding and did a lot of charity work, toy runs, veteran support events, that sort of thing. But they also didn't take kindly to bullies or people throwing their weight around. An idea began to form. A potentially beautiful, chaotic idea. I looked at the HCCSP brochure again, at Bob's smug face. Oh yeah, Bob, I thought. You want to project authority? You have no idea what authority looks like. You think your little costume patrol is intimidating. You're about to meet some guys who don't need uniforms to command respect, and they're coming for barbecue. My call to Chuck, aka Chaos, was brief and to the point. Hey Chaos, it's Mr. Miller. How's things? Never dull, he chuckled, his voice gravelly. What's up? Need some security consulting? Your firewalls finally get breached by sentient malware? Worse, I said. HOA problems. I could almost hear him groan through the phone. Oh man, don't tell me you live in one of those places. Nope, thank God. But one moved in next door, and their wannabe dictator thinks my ranch is part of his kingdom. Long story short, he's formed a fake police force and is harassing me. There was a pause, then Chaos laughed. A deep, rumbling sound. Fake cops? Seriously? What, like mall security with delusions of grandeur? Exactly, I confirmed. They've got uniforms. A decal-led SUV. The whole 9 yards. Sending me fines, trespassing for photos. The usual HOA power trip, dialed up to 11. Wow. That takes some balls, Chaos said, though his tone suggested stupidity more than courage. So, what's the play? You want us to talk to them? Not exactly, I said, outlining my burgeoning idea. The Steel Dragons do that big charity barbecue every summer, right? For the Veterans Fund? Yeah, usually mid-July. Why? How'd you like to have it at my ranch this year? Plenty of space, good scenery, away from town complaints about the noise. I'll provide the grounds, you guys bring the party. Consider it my donation to the fund. There was a thoughtful silence. Your place, huh? 60 acres, you said? Lots of parking, private. I like it. Takes the hassle out of getting park permits. But why the sudden generosity? Let's just say, I replied, savoring the thought, I have a feeling my HOA neighbors might be planning a little uninvited visit around mid-July. And I thought it would be beneficial for them to see a large gathering of patriotic barbecue-loving citizens enjoying their constitutional right to assemble peacefully on private property, especially citizens who appreciate classic American iron and tend to wear leather. Chaos started laughing again. Oh, I get it. You want our hoe-hating mugs there as a visual deterrent when Captain Cosplay and his sidekick show up. Something like that, I admitted. No trouble needed, just be yourselves. Enjoy the barbecue. Let nature take its course. Consider it done, Chaos said readily. This sounds way more fun than the usual park pavilion. I'll run it by the guys, but they'll be game. Free venue, good cause, and sticking it to some HOA clowns? Perfect trifecta. Send me the dates you're thinking, and we'll lock it in. We settled on the third Saturday in July. Perfect. That gave me about 6 weeks to prepare and, more importantly, to see what fresh insanity Bob Jenkins and his Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol would cook up next. Sure enough, they didn't disappoint. A few days after the invoice arrived, I saw it, the white Ford Explorer, cruising slowly down the county road past my entrance. It wasn't speeding, just observing. Bob Jenkins was in the passenger seat, binoculars raised, peering intently up my driveway towards the house. The driver was the other guy from the brochure, wearing the build cap pulled low. They didn't stop, didn't trespass, but the message was clear. We're watching you. This happened a few more times over the next couple of weeks. Sometimes early morning, sometimes late afternoon. Always the slow drive-by, the peering binoculars. My cameras recorded every pass, time-stamped and clear as day. I compiled the footage, along with copies of their letters, the invoice, my correspondence, the photos they'd taken, the brochure for their fake police, and the county official's confirmation about the zoning ordinance. I sent the whole package to Mark, my lawyer cousin. He was impressed by the sheer audacity. "This is gold," he said. "They're building our case for us. The harassment is clear. The impersonation angle is getting stronger with that vehicle and those uniforms. Keep recording. Let them dig their hole deeper." But Bob wasn't content with just drive-bys. One afternoon, I was out mending the very fence they'd complained about near the creek, replacing a few rusted strands of barbed wire, perfectly normal ranch maintenance. The HCCSP Explorer pulled onto the shoulder of the county road, much closer this time. Bob Jenkins got out, marched towards my property line, and stopped just short of stepping onto my land. He was in full uniform, complete with the shiny patch. "Afternoon!" he called out, trying to sound official but mostly just sounding like an angry golfer. "Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you about this fence." I straightened up slowly, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Afternoon, Bob. We have nothing to talk about. You're on county property. My fence is on my property, and it's perfectly fine." "It is not fine," he retorted, puffing out his chest. "It's dilapidated. It violates HOA aesthetic standards, and it's a safety hazard." "Bob," I said calmly, gesturing around at the empty fields. "Safety hazard to whom? The deer? And whose aesthetic standards? Yours? They don't apply here. You know that." "We'll see about that," he snapped. "We have received numerous complaints." "From whom?" "The imaginary residents living in the trees between his cookie-cutter houses and my ranch. Your fence fails to meet the minimum standards outlined in Harmony Creek Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph B." "Bob," I sighed, deciding to play along slightly. "Show me where Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph B is filed in the county courthouse records as applying to my property deed." "Go ahead." "I'll wait," he sputtered, his face turning red. "It applies because it impacts our community. Your negligence reflects poorly on all adjacent properties. We have a duty to uphold standards." "You have a duty," I said, my voice hardening, "to stay off my property and stop harassing me. This conversation is over." I turned back to my fence work. He stood there, fuming for another minute, yelled something about escalating enforcement, then got back in his fake cop car and drove off. But the incident spooked me a little. His frustration was boiling over. He was getting bolder, more confrontational. Mark's words about them stepping into a world of hurt seemed prophetic. I doubled down on preparations for the barbecue. I cleared a large, flat area near the pond for parking and mingling, set up locations for food tables and grills, and made sure the access route from the county road was clear. I also contacted Chuck again. "Hey, Chaos, just checking in. How's the BBQ planning?" "Full steam ahead," he reported. "Word got out, and we're expecting a big turnout. Probably close to 100 bikes, maybe more. Folks are excited about the new location." "Anything new on the fake cop front?" I told him about Bob's roadside confrontation. "Sounds like he's getting desperate," Chaos observed. "Good. Desperate people make mistakes. Don't worry, we'll be there. Bright and early on Saturday. You just provide the scenery. We'll provide the atmosphere." The day before the barbecue, I received one final notice from the HOA. It wasn't mailed. It was stuck to my gatepost, laminated, zip-tied firmly. It was titled, "Final Notice of Abatement Action." It declared that since I had failed to remedy the cited violations — horses, trailer, garden, fence — the Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol would be entering my property on Saturday, July 23rd, the day of the barbecue naturally, at approximately 1:00 p.m. to document the violations for further legal action and potentially undertake necessary abatement measures if voluntary compliance was not achieved upon their arrival. It cited their bogus bylaws and the non-applicable county ordinance again. At the bottom, in bold red letters, "Access will be required. Obstruction will result in escalated enforcement." Signed, Bob Jenkins, President, Harmony Creek HOA, and Head of Community Safety. I took a photo of the notice, then carefully removed it. This was it. They were actually going to try and force their way onto my ranch. They had announced their illegal raid in writing. Mark was ecstatic when I forwarded him the photo. "Are you kidding me? They put it in writing? Bob Jenkins is a gift. This is better than I could have hoped." He advised me to call the county sheriff's non-emergency line on Saturday morning, explain the situation factually, that I was hosting a large private charity event, and that my neighbors from the HOA, who run an unofficial security patrol, had posted a notice threatening to enter my property without permission that afternoon under the guise of enforcing non-existent rules. "Don't make it sound like you expect trouble," Mark coached. "Just that you want the sheriff's office to be aware of the situation and the potential for trespassing or a disturbance by this group, given their history of harassment and their impersonation-like activities. Let them decide if they want to send a deputy to observe or just have it logged." I made the call Saturday morning. The dispatcher was polite, took down the information, and said they'd log it and notify the patrol deputies. Perfect. Everything was in place. The stage was set. All that was left was for Bob and his Keystone Cops to make their entrance, and for the Steel Dragons to enjoy some barbecue. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a perfect Texas summer day. The smell of charcoal and roasting meat started wafting through the air by mid-morning as the Steel Dragons began arriving. They weren't the Hollywood caricature of bikers. Yes, there was a lot of leather, chrome, and engine rumble, but they were organized and respectful of my property. Chuck had designated parking areas, and bikes were lined up neatly in the field I'd cleared. Families were there too, wives, kids, setting up picnic blankets near the pond. Music played from portable speakers, but not obnoxiously loud. Laughter echoed across the fields. It felt like a genuine community gathering, which, in essence, it was. By noon, there were easily over 100 motorcycles gleaming in the sun, and probably closer to 200 people mingling, eating, and chatting. Several large grills were loaded with brisket, ribs, and chicken, tended by designated grill masters. Coolers overflowed with drinks. Chuck found me near the farmhouse, handing me a cold water bottle. He had a wide grin. "Place looks great, man. Everyone's loving the space. Much better than that dusty park." He nodded towards the crowd. "Good turnout, eh? Think your friend Bob will appreciate the welcome party?" I looked out at the scene. Rows of Harleys, folks in jeans and Steel Dragons MC cuts relaxing under the shade trees. The peaceful chaos of a large outdoor party. It was quite a sight. "Hard to say chaos," I replied, matching his grin. "Bob's imagination is pretty wild. He might think this is an invading horde." "Well," Chaos chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder, "if he does, he'll find it's a very well-behaved, brisket-appreciating horde." Around 12:45 p.m., I saw one of the guys Chuck had posted as lookouts near the county road subtly signal him. Chaos nodded. "Showtime potentially approaching," he murmured to me, then strolled casually back towards the main gathering area. He didn't make any grand announcement, but words seemed to ripple through the core group of members. There wasn't a sudden tension, more like a quiet alertness, a shifting of postures. People kept chatting and eating, but there was a new awareness directed towards the driveway entrance. I took up a position on my porch, camera phone ready, heart pounding a little faster despite myself. Right on schedule, at almost exactly 1:00 p.m., the white Ford Explorer appeared at the end of my long driveway. It paused there for a moment, the occupants likely surprised by the sheer number of vehicles and people. Then, slowly, it started driving up towards the house, amber lights flashing impotently in the bright sunlight. This was it. The Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol was making its move. The Explorer pulled to a stop about 50 yards from the farmhouse, blocked by a line of parked motorcycles. Bob Jenkins got out of the passenger side, adjusting his build hat. He looked smaller somehow, against the backdrop of the crowd and the bikes. His partner, the driver, got out too. He looked younger and visibly nervous, his eyes darting around at the assembled bikers, many of whom had stopped talking and turned to watch them. Several large bearded men casually started walking towards the front, not menacingly, just repositioning themselves. Bob cleared his throat, puffing himself up. He held a clipboard like a shield. "Ahem, Mr. Miller," he called out, trying to project authority over the low rumble of bike engines and the distant music. I walked down the porch steps and approached him, stopping about 10 feet away. Behind me, Chuck and a few other senior Steel Dragons members flanked me silently. "Bob," I said calmly, "you're trespassing. Your notice is invalid. This is private property, and we're having a private event. You need to leave." Bob glanced uneasily at Chuck and the others, then seemed to rally his courage. "We are the Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol," he announced loudly, holding up his clipboard. "We issued a formal notice of abatement. We are here to conduct an inspection of documented violations affecting the community." Several bikers near the front chuckled openly. "Community?" One of them called out, a big guy with a braided beard. "Buddy, your community ends about a mile that way. This here's a private party." Bob ignored him, focusing on me. "Mr. Miller, you are required to grant us access to inspect the fence line, the pasture, and the outbuildings. Failure to cooperate constitutes obstruction." "Bob," I said, my voice still level but hard, "let me be very clear. You are not law enforcement. Your uniform is a costume. Your car is a joke. Your bylaws mean nothing here. You have no authority on this property. None. You are trespassing, and you are harassing me and my guests. I am telling you, for the last time, to get back in your ridiculous car and leave immediately." The younger guy beside Bob swallowed hard, looking like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else. Bob's face was getting red again. He seemed genuinely bewildered that his official-looking clipboard and uniform weren't having the desired effect. "This is lawful notification," he insisted, waving the clipboard. "We represent the HOA. We have a fiduciary duty." Chuck stepped forward slightly. He's not a huge man, but he has an undeniable presence. He didn't raise his voice. "Friend," he said to Bob, his tone deceptively mild. "You heard the man. This is a private charity event for veterans. We're guests here, and you're interrupting our barbecue. Now, unless you've got a warrant signed by an actual judge, I suggest you and your associate make yourselves scarce before you ruin the brisket." Bob looked from Chuck to me, then to the silent crowd of bikers watching him. The scale of the situation finally seemed to penetrate his delusion. He wasn't dealing with one intimidated homeowner. He was facing down 100 unimpressed members of a motorcycle club on their turf during their event. His authority, imaginary to begin with, evaporated completely. He stammered, "But the violations, the notice." "There are no violations, Bob," I repeated tiredly. "There is no notice recognized by law. There is only you, trespassing, and potentially about to face charges for impersonating an officer if you push this any further." I pulled out my phone. "Now, I'm going to count to 10. If you're not back in your car and heading down that driveway by the time I reach 10, I'm calling the sheriff. Again, I already logged your threat this morning. And I'll be pressing charges for trespassing and harassment. And I suspect quite a few of my guests will be willing witnesses." I started counting, slowly, deliberately. 1, 2. Bob's partner grabbed his arm. "Bob, come on, let's go. This isn't worth it." Bob looked wildly around, his eyes wide, his fantasy crumbling around him. He saw only impassive faces, leather jackets, and gleaming chrome. He saw the absurdity of his position reflected in their eyes. 3, 4. He snatched his arm away from his partner but turned abruptly. "This isn't over," he blustered weakly, but there was no conviction in it. He practically scrambled back into the passenger seat of the Explorer. His partner needed no second urging, diving into the driver's side. 5, 6. The Explorer executed a clumsy three-point turn, its tires spitting gravel, narrowly avoiding a row of bikes. 7. It sped back down the driveway, kicking up dust, the amber light still flashing pointlessly. It reached the county road and turned sharply back towards the beige sanctuary of Harmony Creek Estates. 8. A cheer went up from some of the bikers. Laughter broke out. Chuck turned to me, shaking his head with a wide grin. Well, that was anticlimactic. Didn't even get to offer him a rib. The tension broke completely. Music swelled again. Conversations resumed. The smell of barbecue reclaimed the air. The Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol had officially met the Steel Dragons MC, and the encounter had ended exactly as I'd hoped, with utter humiliation and a hasty retreat. Bob Jenkins' little empire of fake authority had just received a very rude reality check. And the best part? It was all perfectly legal on my end, utterly disastrous on his, and beautifully, poetically just. The departure of Bob Jenkins and his sidekick in their faux patrol car was met with cheers and laughter from the Steel Dragons and their families. The tension evaporated instantly, replaced by amusement and a renewed focus on the barbecue. Chaos clapped me on the back again. Well handled, man. Didn't even have to raise our voices. Sometimes, just showing up is enough. He was right. The bikers hadn't made a single threat, hadn't moved aggressively. Their mere presence, combined with my calm but firm refusal to acknowledge Bob's fantasy authority, had been enough to completely dismantle the situation. It was a beautiful example of passive resistance, albeit backed by the implicit intimidation factor of 100 leather-clad individuals. As the afternoon wore on, the barbecue continued without further incident. People ate, drank, shared stories, and enjoyed the sunshine. Kids played near the pond. The only reminder of the brief interruption was the occasional joke about community safety inspections or offers to check if anyone's fence met aesthetic standards. Around 3:00 p.m., something interesting happened. A county sheriff's deputy cruiser rolled slowly up my driveway. This wasn't Bob's toy car. This was the real deal. The deputy, a seasoned-looking woman with a calm demeanor, parked behind the last row of bikes and got out. Chaos and I walked over to meet her. "Afternoon, folks," she said, surveying the large but orderly crowd. "Dispatch got a call this morning about a potential issue here, something about an HOA dispute, and a possible planned trespass?" "Afternoon, deputy," I replied. "That was me who called. I was hosting this charity barbecue today, and the president of the neighboring HOA, who runs an unofficial security patrol, had posted a notice saying they intended to enter my property today around 1 p.m. to enforce their rules, which don't apply here. They showed up as threatened." "Okay," she said, taking out a notepad. "And what happened when they arrived?" I recounted the events precisely. Bob and his partner driving up in their marked Explorer with flashing lights, Bob getting out in uniform demanding access, my refusal based on their lack of jurisdiction and trespassing, the presence of my guests, pointing to the Steel Dragons crowd, and Bob's eventual hasty retreat after I threatened to call the authorities. Chuck corroborated the story, emphasizing the peaceful nature of the gathering and Bob's attempt to assert non-existent authority. Several other bikers, who had overheard, nodded in agreement. The deputy listened patiently, jotting down notes. "They were in uniform? And the vehicle was marked Safety Patrol with lights?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, ma'am," I confirmed. "Navy blue outfits, patches, build hats, white Explorer with Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol decals, and an amber light bar." I showed her the photos I'd taken of the notice on my gatepost, and the pictures from the HOA's brochure featuring Bob and his partner in uniform next to the vehicle. Her expression became decidedly less neutral. "Right," she said slowly. "Unofficial patrol. Uniforms. Marked vehicle with emergency lighting trying to enforce rules off their own property. That crosses a few lines." She asked for Bob Jenkins' name and the name of the HOA, which I readily provided. She also took down my contact information and Chuck's, thanking us for the information and for handling the situation calmly. "We've had minor dealings with Mr. Jenkins before regarding the HOA rules," she said diplomatically. "Nothing rising to this level. Impersonating an officer, or even creating the appearance of official authority to intimidate, is a serious matter. We'll be paying Mr. Jenkins a visit to discuss his patrol activities." She gave a nod to the crowd. "Looks like a well-run event. Just keep the noise reasonable and make sure everyone gets home safe." With that, she got back in her cruiser and left. Chuck whistled softly. "Looks like Bob's about to have a real authority figure asking him questions. You might have just done the whole county a favor." The rest of the barbecue was a success. The Steel Dragons raised a good amount for their Veterans Fund. Everyone had a great time, and by evening, the bikes rumbled off down the county road, leaving my ranch peaceful once more. The cleanup was thorough. You could barely tell such a large gathering had taken place, aside from some flattened grass where the bikes had parked. But the fallout from Bob Jenkins' disastrous raid was just beginning. A couple of days later, Mark called me, barely containing his excitement. "You are not going to believe this," he started. "Remember that deputy who came out? She filed a detailed report, including the potential impersonation issues. It got kicked up the chain. The county attorney's office is looking into it." Apparently, Bob didn't just buy security guard uniforms. He chose a color scheme and patch design deliberately similar to the county constables, and the vehicle markings were also borderline deceptive. Combine that with his actions, demanding access, citing bogus authority, using flashing lights off HOA property, and they might have enough for misdemeanor charges, maybe even a felony count depending on how hard they want to push the impersonation angle. But that wasn't all. The deputy's visit to Bob Jenkins had apparently not gone well for Bob. According to Mark, who had his sources, Bob had tried to bluster and justify his actions, claiming he was performing a vital community service. When confronted with the specifics, the uniform, the lights, the trespass onto my ranch, the sheer illegality of trying to enforce HOA rules on non-HOA property, Bob allegedly became belligerent, accusing the sheriff's department of failing to support law-abiding communities like Harmony Creek. This attitude did not endear him to the investigators. Furthermore, word of the raid and the confrontation with the bikers had spread like wildfire within Harmony Creek Estates. Someone must have seen the HCCSP Explorer flee back into the development, or perhaps Bob's nervous partner had talked. The HOA message boards lit up. People were furious, not at me, but at Bob. They were paying increased dues for enhanced security, not for the HOA president to cosplay as a cop, pick fights with neighbors, and potentially embroil the entire community in legal trouble and public ridicule. An emergency HOA meeting was called. According to Dale, my construction contact who still had friends living there, it was brutal. Residents demanded answers about the safety patrol's budget, its authority, and Bob's actions. They wanted to know why HOA funds were being used for uniforms, vehicle modifications, and legal threats against someone who wasn't even a member. Bob tried to defend himself, painting me as an unreasonable scofflaw and the bikers as dangerous thugs, but nobody was buying it. His support on the board evaporated as other members scrambled to distance themselves from the fiasco. The HOA's lawyer, likely sensing disaster, advised them to immediately cease all safety patrol activities, recall the uniforms and vehicle, and retract all notices and fines issued to me. Bob Jenkins was reportedly stripped of his head of community safety title, though he clung precariously to the presidency for a short while longer. Mark then drafted a formidable legal letter on my behalf to the HOA and its legal counsel. It detailed the history of harassment, the illegal surveillance, the attempted trespass and intimidation by the fake patrol, and the potential civil and criminal liabilities they faced. It demanded a formal written apology, confirmation that all bogus fines were permanently rescinded, a guarantee of no further contact or harassment of any kind, and reimbursement for my security camera installation costs and Mark's legal fees incurred in responding to their nonsense. The alternative, the letter strongly implied, was a multi-pronged lawsuit seeking significant damages for harassment, invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potentially supporting the county's investigation into their illegal patrol activities. The HOA, now leaderless, Bob had resigned for health reasons shortly after the disastrous meeting, and facing revolt from within, folded completely. Their lawyer responded almost immediately, agreeing to all terms. I received a stilted letter of apology signed by the interim board president, confirmation that all fines were gone, payment for my expenses, and a solemn promise to never bother me again. The Harmony Creek Community Safety Patrol vanished overnight. The Explorer was stripped of its decals and light bar, and Bob Jenkins seemingly disappeared from public life within the community. Peace returned to my 60 acres. The horses grazed undisturbed. The rusty trailer sat where it always had, and my garden thrived. The victory was sweet, not just because the harassment stopped, but because Bob's little empire of delusion had been so thoroughly and publicly dismantled, hoisted by his own petard of petty tyranny and fake authority. And it wouldn't have happened so spectacularly without the perfectly timed, entirely peaceful presence of the Steel Dragon's MC enjoying a sunny afternoon barbecue. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting bullies crash headfirst into a reality they refuse to acknowledge, especially when that reality includes brisket, chrome, and 100 people who really don't like fake cops interrupting their party. The resolution felt almost too easy after months of escalating tension, but the effects were profound and lasting. The Harmony Creek HOA, chastened and likely terrified of further legal entanglements, completely retreated. There were no more letters, no more invoices, no more drive-bys from Bob Jenkins' ridiculous cosplay cruiser because it simply didn't exist anymore. It was like a switch had been flipped. The oppressive oversight that had emanated from the beige houses down the road just stopped. My ranch returned to being the sanctuary I'd intended it to be. The quiet hum of nature replaced the grating hum of anxiety about what new violation notice might appear. I could work on my fences or park my trailer without wondering if some busybody with binoculars was documenting it for a fictional rulebook. The security cameras I'd installed stayed up, not out of fear, but as a prudent measure. Good fences make good neighbors, and good cameras deter bad ones, even if those bad ones have seemingly learned their lesson. The impact within Harmony Creek itself was also significant. Dale kept me updated occasionally. The HOA went through a period of upheaval. The board members who had enabled Bob were voted out at the next election, replaced by residents who promised more transparency and less aggressive enforcement. The focus shifted from punitive measures to actual community building, social events, park improvements, things that didn't involve harassing neighbors or playing cop. They reportedly slashed the budget line that had funded Bob's adventures, leading to a modest reduction in dues, which was universally popular. Bob Jenkins, from what I heard, became persona non grata. He still lived there apparently, but kept a very low profile. No more strutting around at community events, no more chairing committees. His brief reign as the neighborhood dictator had ended in ignominy. The county attorney's office did eventually conclude their investigation. Mark informed me that while they likely had enough to pursue charges related to the impersonation aspect, they ultimately decided against it, issuing a stern, formal warning to the HOA and Jenkins personally instead. The key factors seemed to be the swift dismantling of the fake patrol, Bob's removal from power, and the lack of any actual physical confrontation or harm during the attempted raid. Essentially, the problem had rectified itself before requiring full legal intervention, partly thanks to the clear message sent that day. Mark felt it was a reasonable outcome. Bob faced significant public humiliation and loss of face. The HOA got a sharp wake-up call, and I got the peace I was entitled to, along with my costs covered. Pursuing charges might have dragged things out for months or years, whereas this resolution was swift and decisive. My relationship with the Steel Dragon's MC was solidified. Chuck and the guys considered the barbecue event one of their most memorable. They appreciated the venue, the lack of hassle, and admittedly, the bonus entertainment provided by the HCCSP's failed raid. They made it clear that if I ever had any more trouble from anyone encroaching on my peace, I shouldn't hesitate to call. Not for trouble, but just to have another barbecue. Knowing I had that network of support, unexpected as it was, provided an additional layer of security beyond cameras and legal letters. It was the security of community, albeit a community that rode Harleys and enjoyed loud engines. Looking back, the whole affair seems almost surreal. The audacity of Bob Jenkins and his HOA cronies to believe they could just invent authority and enforce it beyond their boundaries is still staggering. It's a testament to how unchecked power, even at the hyper-local level of an HOA board, can corrupt and create petty tyrants. Bob wasn't just a grumpy neighbor. He embodied a specific kind of entitlement, a belief that his preferred aesthetic and his interpretation of rules should govern everyone within his line of sight, regardless of property lines or actual laws. His downfall wasn't just a personal victory for me. It felt like a small blow struck for everyone who's ever been harassed by an overzealous HOA or dealt with someone who confuses their minor position of authority with ultimate power. The irony, of course, was that Bob's attempt to project authority and intimidate me led directly to his humiliation at the hands of a group far more authentically intimidating, though ultimately peaceful, than his fake patrol could ever hope to be. He picked a fight, expecting an easy win against a lone rancher, and instead stumbled into a hornet's nest, or perhaps more accurately, a biker rally. He wanted order and compliance according to his narrow vision. What he got was a lesson in boundaries, respect, and the fact that the world doesn't revolve around Harmony Creek Estates. Sometimes I wonder what goes through Bob's mind now, when he looks out from his perfectly manicured lawn towards the tree line bordering my ranch. Does he remember the flashing amber lights of his Folly Explorer reflecting off the chrome of 100 motorcycles? Does he recall the quiet, unimpressed stares of the steel dragons? Does he perhaps reflect on the wisdom of sticking to regulating lawn height and mailbox colors within his own jurisdiction? Probably not. People like Bob rarely learn humility. But he learned fear, or at least caution. And sometimes, that's enough. My ranch remains my sanctuary. The horses graze peacefully. The garden grows. The old trailer sits ready for use. Life is quiet again, just the way I like it. And every year, around mid-July, the rumble of engines fills the air for a day as the Steel Dragons return for their annual charity barbecue, a tradition now firmly established on my 60 acres. It's a good time for a good cause, and maybe, just maybe, it serves as a subtle reminder to any aspiring neighborhood dictators that some boundaries are best left respected. If you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember, document everything. Know your rights, consult with experts, and sometimes, unexpected allies can make all the difference. Don't let the Bob Jenkinses of the world grind you down. Stand your ground. You might be surprised how quickly their fabricated authority crumbles when faced with determined resistance and perhaps a well-timed barbecue.